Hello, welcome. This is a video about songwriting, starting with lyrics. So as you join, as always, let me know where you're coming from in the world. And if you're part of the replay crew, let me know as well. Always like to see where people are at. I'm coming from the Mountain West in the US and digging on some music theory as we do. So songwriting is an interesting process, and we're going to talk through some of the different methods. And specifically, we're going to focus on the process of starting with lyrics. It may not be the most common method, but it can be really effective. We're going to go through some examples and see how some really great songwriters have done this, starting with the lyrics. Lyrics are, by definition, an essential ingredient in the recipe of songwriting. And so we're going to look at songwriting starting with that element, with the layer of lyrics. So let me jump into some illustrations here. And to begin, if we look at any given song as layers of music or as a composite of different sounds, imagine you took, in screen printing, you have CMYK, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. If you approach songwriting with a similar kind of approach as a metaphor here, you have rhythm as the base layer, and it's the movement of music through time. So that's an essential ingredient. And then you have harmony, the chords that support the melody. You have the melody itself, the main notes that you sing or play in a song, and then the lyrics, which are the words that you sing. So different songs sometimes exclude some of these layers, or they focus on a certain layer. They emphasize one versus the other. But when you get down to it, when you boil it all down, pretty much every song includes these four main layers. And Jack, it's cool to see you on. Right on. Thanks for joining. Well, we could kind of focus on these four layers and say that each layer serves an essential function or purpose in a song. Rhythm is the layer of movement. Harmony gives the music direction. So a harmonic progression, a chord progression, there are chord functions and certain relationships between harmonies that guide that movement through harmonic space. So harmony is direction. Melody is the focus. You can have, ambient music that doesn't necessarily have a melody. If it's just harmony, there's direction along with the movement of rhythm, but melody gives everything more focus. It comes more in focus as the melody moves, as the melody moves in tandem with the harmony. And then the lyrics give a song meaning. So a lot of times, when people speak of songs, they almost kind of inherently seem to emphasize the lyrics as an essential piece of the song. In fact, a lot of times the lyrics, some people analyze a song through the lens of lyrics, almost kind of giving these the back seat so much that they don't even really think about the music. It's like the lyrics. I mean, for example, Bob Dylan got a Nobel Prize for literature. I think it was for literature, for his lyrics, which kind of makes sense because, his music is good, but his lyrics really stand out. So lyrics, by definition, are an essential part of a song. Hey, Rodney, it's cool to see you on. Glenn Ragland, right on. Hello, and welcome to this video about songwriting starting with lyrics. So all of these different layers in a song are essential. The lyrics are really important. A song is, by definition, music that you sing to. So we're going to look at songs that start with the lyrics. And as a guitar player, for example, you can perform all of these. Your rhythm, your strumming hand really kind of injects rhythm into a song. Your chord playing hand chords are harmony. So they give a song direction. And then typically, you can play the melody, but if you're, a one-man band singing, performing the song, the melody is sung and the lyrics are sung. So the lyrics are the words, the melody is the actual path of notes through space, through musical space. So to kind of geek out here, and I think this is in lesson 12 of the course, talking about the different layers of music, where you can think of the melody as speaking to the limbic brain, or the core visceral sensation part of the brain. It is like a musical story without words, a melody. And then to give that musical story meaning that you can recognize or express in words, the lyrics speak to like the language processing part of the brain. So there's this whole brain experience, or multi-part brain experience of songs. And so again, we're going to focus on the lyrics as the starting point in the process. And again, you have rhythm is movement, harmony is direction, melody is focus, lyrics are meaning. So there are different approaches, and this is something that is in lesson 13 that I'm about to be publishing here, which is different approaches. Many roads lead to Rome, as the saying goes. You can get to a destination from approaching it from different angles. And one of those ways you can do is, say, starting with the rhythm. So rhythm first. Say, you find a cool beat, some kind of nice rhythmic pattern, and then maybe that spawns the idea for a lyric, which then lends itself to a melody and then a harmony. And before you know it, you have this composite of multiple layers that make a song. Or alternatively, you could start with the lyrics, which is what we're going to do here. And again, the lyrics might lend themselves to a nice melody, a harmony, and then maybe the rhythm fills in at the end. There are lots of songs that actually follow that pattern. As another alternative, you could maybe start with a melody, and then maybe you come up with the chord progression, and then maybe the words to fill that in, and then the rhythm kind of comes last. That actually is the process that Paul McCartney followed when writing the song Yesterday, for example. He outlines that in a biography of his, where he actually gets, he pulls back the curtain in ways that he normally doesn't in terms of the songwriting process. And it's pretty cool how he did it. And I talk about that in lesson 13 in more detail. But here, again, we're going to start with lyrics as an interesting way to go about things. So I don't know if you know the band Stone Temple Pilots. You've got the DeLeo brothers, Robert and Dean, who wrote the chord progressions, wrote the bass lines, wrote the melodies. They kind of like came up with the layers of harmony, melody, and then Eric Kretz is the drummer. So the way that Stone Temple Pilots wrote songs is these three guys did the harmony, the melody, the rhythm, and then Scott Weiland would come in after the fact, after all of the music was there, and he would add lyrics to the song, and it really fleshed it out. And the thing about lyrics is that they make music more relatable. You can sing along. You can't really sing along. Well, you can't sing along with something that doesn't have words. So, and also as the front man, he, kind of embodies the group, which is often the case with singers. And you can see it in his eyes. He was basically a pain in the ass for this band because he was emotionally not well. But anyway, Stone Temple Pilots is a good example of starting with the music and then applying lyrics after the fact. Another example, actually, before we get into that, actually just today, saw a little clip Paul McCartney was talking about the song All My Loving. And he said it was unusual for him because, again, in this example, I said that in the song Yesterday by the Beatles, also by Paul McCartney, he said that he dreamed up the melody, figured out the chord progression to support that melody, added lyrics. The original lyrics were scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs, which is a little less romantic than how the lyrics ended up. And then he added, rhythm, filled it in with rhythm at the end. But he started with melody. And the song All My Loving, which is an early Beatles song from 1964, I believe, started with lyrics. And he said, I almost never started out a song that way, which is interesting. He said he was on a tour bus and, wrote down the lyrics, had this idea because they were touring all the time, the Beatles were. And so All My Loving, I will send to you. They were on the road all the time. So that kind of came to mind. And so then he, figured out the chord progression of the song and added in the chord progression. So this song, if we pull up, this is Ultimate Guitar. It's I'll pretend that I'm kissing the lips I am missing and hope that my dreams will come true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day and I'll send all my loving to you. So you can see, without the chords, if you focus just on the lyrics, it's a nice poem. It's a nice sentiment. I'll pretend that I'm kissing the lips that I'm missing. It rhymes. I hope that my dreams will come true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day and I'll send all my loving to you. And knowing about how chord progressions work, he knew that, he had some rhymes, true, you, and, kissing, missing, away every day. And he knew that it was in the key of D because he lands on that D. So it starts with an E minor, a minor 2. I'll pretend that I'm kissing to 5, the lips 1, and then missing minor 6, G, which is the 4, E minor, minor 2, C, it's a borrowed flat major 7 chord from Mixolydian, which gives it kind of a bluesy sound, and then back to that A, and then goes in through the chord progression again. E minor, A, D, B minor, G, A, 5, or 1, pardon me, D major. So with those lyrics, he started out with a pretty solid lyric. I mean, it's not as interesting as later Beatles lyrics. It was a lot of the I love you, you love me, I miss you, kissing, missing. It's a little bit relatively juvenile compared to how the Beatles songs evolved. But that's an interesting example of starting with the lyrics. And I mean, it's such an amazing chord progression, partly because it stays within that harmonic major key. All of the chords, except for that flat major 7, which gives it a bluesy feel, is all within the key of D. So that's an example of a song that starts with lyrics. Stone Temple Pilots, we won't look at actual specific examples there, but we are going to look at a cool example of another songwriting team that starts with lyrics, and that is Bernie Taupin, who's the lyricist for Elton John. Elton John, does anyone know what his actual name is, his given name? 10 points for anyone who knows off the top. I actually didn't know this, or maybe I did, but then I forgot until just this week. But his actual name is Reginald Kenneth Dwight. So in some interviews that I've seen, these guys, Bernie Taupin refers to Elton as Reg, which I think is kind of interesting. So he talks about Reg and how, as a lyricist, he's not up on stage performing, but he personally loves it that way. He's shy, whereas Elton is anything but shy. And so we're going to look at an example of how Reg, aka Elton, took some really great lyrics by Bernie Taupin. Bernie Taupin is a prolific lyricist, comes up with really interesting lyrics, and this is how they did it. So I'm going to try something here that I've never done before, and it is, I'm going to play a clip, and hopefully the audio works. So just one sec as I get this lined up. because it's such a great little clip here. Okay. Let's get this going. All right, here we go. Oh, hold on. Sorry, stand by. First time doing this. I don't know why it's not working. Okay, I'm going to lip sync what he's saying. But basically he's saying, hey, he pulls out this stack of papers and says, hey, I came up with a song to these lyrics that was called Tiny Dancer because Bernie Taupin knew that I would probably want to write music to this one because it's about Bernie's girlfriend at the time, who Bernie married shortly after. And so he's just like, this is basically how I wrote it. He's going through the lyrics. He's like, blue jean baby, LA lady, if you know the song Tiny Dancer, seamstress for the band, pretty-eyed, pirate smile, you'll marry a music man. And then he says the word ballerina is in the next verse. And he's like, ballerina. It gave me an idea. It's going to be a little bit slower. It's going to be kind of more of a tender song given the theme. And so here he is playing the chords and singing along with the song, or singing along with the lyrics, and just kind of showing how he blocked out the chords and came up with a chord progression that matches the vibe of the song. That is Bernie's girlfriend at the time. And you can kind of see this dawning recognition, like, wait a sec, this song's about me, which would be amazing. So as he goes through, as Reg/Elton is playing the song, he's kind of describing how, at this part, it kind of picks up. And then at this point, there's going to be drum, or he said there are drums. Well, no, there are going to be drums, because you can see this is from 1971. So this is an early documentary. And so he's talking about how the song developed in this way. And, he describes it as though he's dissecting the lyrics and building it out with a chord progression. So that's the first attempt at playing audio. My voiceover is probably not as interesting as hearing it actually as he describes it, but the idea is it's so one thing to keep is Elton John. He was kind of classically trained early on, and then also had a blues background, and so he adds a lot of frills and arpeggiation to chords that are, if you play them as block chords, it's blue jean baby, LA lady, but he's adding, but it's basically just arpeggiated, a melodic version of what is basically a chord progression of C to F, C to F. Here, let me show you. Hold on. Let's pull that up. So here are the lyrics. He's got blue jean baby, LA lady. So this is the lyrics that Bernie Taupin came up with. And Elton, in other interviews talks about how he's like, if I tried to write my own lyrics, it would be like, I love you. Yes, I do. It's just very, very basic. His mind is just so geared towards the music of it that he doesn't think in a lyrical sense. So playing with Bernie is a really good combo. And they've been like together as a songwriting duo for like 40, 50 years or something. But so it's blue jean baby. So C, F, C, F, and then C, F, and then he throws in a G7 there. And we'll look at what these chords are in music theory. And then C, F, C, F, C, and then F, C. So it's really basically it's in the key of C, and it's moving back between C and F for the most part. So a 1 and a 5. Then things get really interesting with the F, E minor 7, which is a beautiful change, and then goes to A minor 7, and then D, and then D minor 7. We'll look at what these mean. E7, and then A minor, G7, and C. So it's blue jean baby, C to F, C to F, G7, and then brings us back to C to F. Pirate smile, a merry music man. And then this is where it gets really nice. So ballerina, you must have seen her dancing in the sand. And he comes back to C. So if Elton John had just started with a blank slate without any lyrics, he could have come up with that chord progression for sure. But the lyrics really kind of give this framework of movement and of the harmonic direction that the song takes. And you can see it's, if I tap out the rhythm, blue jean baby, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Seamstress for the band, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty-eyed. So there's some syncopation going on because he's not starting on each downbeat, but you can see that it gives the lyrics give this rhythmic framework. So there's some rhythm baked into the song, but into the lyrics, but you can see just based on the way that the lyrics are that it's already kind of dictating the fact that this wouldn't really be a waltz. It wouldn't be in 3/4 time because of how the syllables and the rhythm of the lyrics go. So having this framework basically makes it possible, gives the starting point, that igniting the spark of an idea for Elton John to come up with that chord progression. So it's interesting because for me personally, I don't really think in terms of lyrics first. In fact, lyrics are like the last thing that I think of. I often think in terms of the music, the melody, the harmony, and then the rhythm, and then the lyrics are an afterthought. But you can see how with a method like this, that having the lyrics first actually gives you a great head start, can be a great advantage, not only because it gives you that framework, that structure of musical cadence and the syllables and the rhythm, but it also lays out the theme. So it lends itself or inspires chord progression, a chord progression that can go well with that. So it's definitely not my natural go-to. It's interesting to see how, someone can, play with different ways of tackling a song with an approach like this. Now, Elton John has said that he never starts with the lyrics. Never starts with the music. It's always the lyrics. And so as a result, Bernie Taupin has had to be as prolific as Elton John. In one of the interviews that I heard, the band, Elton's backing band, said that Elton, they're like, this sounds unbelievable, but to have someone sit down and come up with 10 songs in like a half an hour, they're like, it's true. Like that really would happen, where he would just like bust out like just all of these ideas coming out of him. But you can see how having lyrics first, having Bernie Taupin send him the lyrics, it actually started out first as it was Bernie would just mail, even before they met physically in person, Bernie would like mail him lyrics. And then when they finally met, they like totally hit it off because they'd already been collaborating remotely, if I understand correctly. There might be people who know Elton John better than I do, but so kind of interesting that they connect over the words. But it was because Bernie had, in that video, you might have seen, Elton John started out with this wad of lyrics, like it's all these crumpled up pieces of paper. It was just poem after poem, lyric after lyric. So kind of an interesting approach. It actually makes me want to explore this approach more than I have previously. But here I want to talk about another example of someone who has done this masterfully, and that is Natalie Merchant. She was the singer and songwriter in the band 10,000 Maniacs, if you know of them from like the 80s and 90s. So then Natalie Merchant went solo, and she came out with an album, it was probably like 12 years ago now, called Leave Your Sleep. And it's a really cool project because she basically took a bunch of, she didn't have a Bernie Taupin, she writes her own lyrics too for her own songs, but for this project, she took a bunch of nursery rhymes, a bunch of poems from poets spanning like 150 years or something. It was like a lot of different poets. And she wrote songs to the poems, to the lyrics, and it ended up being such a cool, eclectic album, as eclectic arguably as, say, the White Album, in terms of genre hopping from one song to the next, which makes sense because she was working with different poets, different styles of writers, which lent themselves to really interesting songs. And Rodney Halsworth, he said Rogers wrote music to Hammerstein's lyrics. Very interesting. So I actually didn't know. You hear of Rogers and Hammerstein, and you know that they were like an amazing duo. And even John Lennon and Paul McCartney, when they first got together, they were like, damn it, we're going to be like the next Rogers and Hammerstein. Like they were the standard by which others based their own efforts. But I didn't know who did what and in what order. So that's very interesting. So with Natalie Merchant, one of the best songs, in my opinion, is there's a guy named William Bridie Rands, who he even lived before photographs. So this is like, I don't think that's even a lithograph, but it's like a depiction of this guy. And he wrote a really cool poem called Topsy Turvy World. And this is just a segment of it. And he lived like in the early 19th century. So he's like way back in the day. You can tell from how he's dressed and his beard. But the gist is, the lyrics are, if a butterfly courted the bee and an owl the porcupine, so it's already surreal. He's basically saying, if all these things happened, it would be a very interesting world. So if churches were built in the sea and 3 times 1 was 9, if the pony rode his master, and if buttercups ate the cows, if the cat had the dire disaster to be worried by a mouse. So there's a possibility that William Bridie Rands was walking through the forest and picked up, some wild mushrooms with a pen and pad of paper and wrote these things down. But definitely inspired Natalie Merchant on this album. And so you can see how she started out, similarly, if the butterfly courted the bee and the owl the porcupine, if churches were built in the sea and 3 times 1 was 9. So it's already not going to be 3/4 time. You can tell the cadence is such that it lends itself to a pattern like that. So, as far as chord progressions go, what she did is the poem just kind of keeps going. It's like if you just kept going like that, and this is only the first few verses, if you kept going like this, it would almost be too much, because it's so surreal, and it just moves at such a pace that it would be over in about 90 seconds if you just played the poem from start to finish. So something that she did, and the Elton John clip where he talks about the song, he kind of speaks to this as well, which is by breaking things up into different song sections. So the part that isn't highlighted is directly from Rands's poem. So that's the first verse. And then Natalie Merchant, to extend the song and give it more musical structure, she actually just inserts a chorus. So she gets the theme of the song, which is then the world would be upside down. Yes, the world would be upside down in this yellow box here. What a topsy-turvy world this would be. The world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. And then she goes on to what we already saw: if the pony rode his master and buttercups ate the cows. And then she repeats that refrain of the chorus. So by chopping it up and inserting different repeating sections, choruses in the vernacular of music, she gives it more of a story. And that's what verses do. I'll talk about this in later lessons in the course, but basically the verses tell a story, advance a song forward thematically, while the chorus repeats the theme. Generally speaking, this is how it goes. And this part repeats, and then you advance the story a little more, and then you reiterate the theme, because music can be disorienting. Like it's not just musical poetry. There's that added element of being repetitive, of repeating cycles. Music is inherently cyclical, so it makes sense that you would repeat the theme. In fact, if you were to, and music, the structure of a song really highlights the fact that music is inherently cyclical. Because imagine if, like, it's totally normal. Well, let's go through this song and then we'll come back to that. So the way she did it, the way that Natalie Merchant made these lyrics come to life was, let's see. If the buttercup is if the butterfly courted the bee, and the owl the porcupine, if churches were built in the sea, and 3 times 1 was 9, then the world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. What a topsy-turvy world this would be. The world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. And then, if the pony rode his master, buttercups ate the cow. If the cat had the dire disaster to be worried by the mouse, then the world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. Yeah, the topsy-turvy world this would be. The world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. Yeah, the world would be upside down. Pretty simple how she did it, because basically she is going to the key of G Ionian, and she's sticking mostly with, the 1, 4, 5. There's a minor 2, a minor 6, but she's basically sticking with chords that are so compatible because they come from the same key, so they sound good together. And then by just following the lyrics and adding it in her own repeated chorus, she basically just it's like almost ready-made. I don't mean to take away from Natalie Merchant in the song, and actually the production of the song is so much better than just playing it like this. It's like a really good song. She actually throws in like a reggae kind of vibe to it, which, if you look at the original poet, he's not from Jamaica, and yet this song really does kind of lend itself to that vibe. So I highly recommend checking out this song. It's called Topsy-Turvy World from Leave Your Sleep, and it's really good. And so you can see here that there's this repeated chorus, and music is unlike any other art form in that if you were to imagine you went to see Romeo and Juliet, and Juliet stands on the balcony and she's like, oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? And, there's that scene. It's dramatic. Romeo's, hiding in the bushes, looking at what's happening. And then the story progresses. But if later on in Act 2, she just walks back on the balcony and is like, oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? And then Romeo's hiding in the bushes, looking up again. You'd be like, what is even going on? Like, that doesn't happen. Like, things don't repeat themselves in the real world. But yet, in music, you can have a repeated section and it's like, yeah, that's fine. We'll just repeat again. We're going to cycle back around. And that totally is not how the real world works. But we accept it as being fine because the chord progression is cyclical. You eventually cycle back to the tonic because music is inherently cyclical. So that's the thing about, music being geometric, being symmetrical, that by its very structure, you can't help but escape the fact that it is cyclical and symmetrical. And so, song structure like this and repeating sections highlights that fact. It would be surreal and bizarre in any other art form, even in film. Like, there are some avant-garde films where the same scenes are repeated. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's cutting edge. That's really cool. But in music, it's not cutting edge. It's expected. It would be weird if you didn't do that. So Topsy-Turvy World is another example of starting with the lyrics. They definitely came first because William Brady Rands lived in the 19th century. So he definitely wrote those lyrics first. And then Natalie Merchant came through and added the melody, added the chord progression, and a rhythm. In this case, a syncopated reggae rhythm to it. In the end, to make a really cool, surreal song itself based on how it came together. So those are some examples of starting with lyrics. We've got, as the examples we talked through, it's All My Loving. Paul McCartney started with the lyrics. It was unusual for him. Almost every other song he writes, it's with the music first. And then Bernie Taupin coming up with a prolific output of poems and songs for Elton John to then riff on and come up with his prolific output as a songwriter. It's like so many albums that they've come out with because of the way they've gone about it. And it almost feels like lyrics doing it that way maybe lends itself to being prolific. I don't know. And then Natalie Merchant, this whole album is really good. Topsy-Turvy World is a good example. But every single song on this album starts with lyrics because it's based on existing poems, existing lyrics in different songs. So I want to catch up with the comments here and shout out to everyone who is here. Jack, right on, Rodney, Glenn, Jane, Doe, good evening. Antonio, it's good to see you on. Rob, I want to highlight your comment here because I'm interested to know how people do things. So you said, I like writing lyrics first like a poem. So that's very cool. And, as you go through, writing lyrics first, what is the order of operations, or does it vary? Like, do you have maybe like the melody that comes next, or the harmony, or the rhythm, or do you sit on the lyrics for a while, or do the lyrics like pretty quickly lend themselves to the music? I'm interested to know like what that process looks like, and how it maybe changes from one song to the next, or if it's pretty consistent. Michael May, cool to see you on. And let's see, Star Rider, you said the example is a high bar. His lyrics are genius. Yes. And I know this was a little bit earlier, so I'm guessing you were referring to Bernie Taupin. He is a genius. If you weren't referring to him, Bernie Taupin is still a genius as far as his lyrics go. And let's see. Glenn Ragland, that's a woodcut. Oh yeah, woodcut. As far as the that's how that effect was made. Okay. So we've got William Brady Rands. You can tell from the way that the grains are. That's interesting. That's pretty cool. That's a dedicated portrait as a method. And Al Pico, cool to see you on. Thank you for joining. Okay, so yes, so Luke, and you made an interesting comment about like the chapters in a book. Yes, taking the different song sections and compiling them, building out a story is like a mini book with different chapters and adding in those details to make the song really shine. Yeah, that's a good point, Rob. So the world would be upside down is an obvious chorus. It also has, it rolls off the tongue. The world would be upside down. Like, it's not hard to riff on that. There's not a whole lot of syllables. I've noticed, and that's one of the challenges that I have with writing lyrics. is I have a tendency to be multisyllabular. I know that's not actually a word, but to like so many great lyrics are one syllable words. Um, and so to be able to, because it makes it more relatable, also easier to work with songs at an atomic level like that, where they're smaller, but the world would be upside down. There are a few, I guess, upside down. Upside is a 2-syllable word, but for the most part, they're all 1-syllable words, which I've noticed is a good theme with great songs. So this is a good question. So Jack, you said, should you write the chorus first or the verses? That is a good question, and I'd be interested to know what others think here and how they go about it. So Dave, you had said chorus for the idea of the song and verses to support the song. I think that may often be the case. As far as the lyrics, I don't know. As far as a lyricist, like it would be great to talk with someone like Bernie Taupin, where he writes, and I've seen some handwritten copies of his stuff. Actually, his first wife, who's shown in that clip, they eventually divorced, but somehow she was able to retain some of the handwritten lyrics. Like I think she had "Goodbye Yellow Brick Road" and "Candle in the Wind" and some other classics, maybe "Benny and the Jets." And so she auctioned them off like decades later, a few years ago, I think. And it looked like from the handwritten ones that he just started with the first verse, like it just kind of flowed. And I could be wrong about his process, but as far as the appearance of the actual songs in handwritten form, they were written with starting with the lyrics. But as far as for songwriting, it may definitely make sense to start with the chorus, because it does. I mean, the chorus is the theme. It's what you reiterate as the theme of the song, and so that might be a good way to go about it. Robbie said, I think that the hook, the chorus is the main idea, and the verses tell the story. Yes. So, and as far as order of operations in writing, composing those, I mean, there's different ways you can go about it. I don't know. I'm because of my lyric writing skills, which aren't Bernie Taupin level. I tend to probably lean towards the chorus first and then the lyrics after that. Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, Rod. So you said 2 pop bands that used outside lyrics, Procol Harum and Grateful Dead. That's interesting. I didn't know that about Grateful Dead. I know that Procol Harum, did one of the guys, at least Whiter Shade of Pale, I think may have been in the band, or maybe not. I can't remember. I know that whoever wrote the lyrics, I mean, he was obviously really young at the time. He might have even been like a teenager, and came up with those lyrics. Such a great song. So Rob, you said you go through different chord changes till something feels good. Yeah. And with being able to see how those chords change, or what the idea is behind those chords, it's interesting. The different examples we went through, Natalie Merchant for sure was the most predictable as far as chord progressions. And then in the song All My Loving, it got pretty. What was All My Loving? Was that in C or D? I think, oh no, it was in D, because there was a C, which is a flat major 7. So All My Loving had more harmonic movement going on. And then the song Tiny Dancer actually has some of the most interesting chords, partly because of that ballerina. You must have seen her dancing in the sand. There's a lot of movement. We've got some secondary dominance in there, from a D to a D minor, which is always a nice move. So depending on how much harmonic movement you have, it can get really interesting with some of the chord progressions. And the nice thing about seeing them in the circle of fifths is this is a further guide. Like if you had lyrics to kind of guide where you're going, and then to have music theory also, prompt the process, is it's like having all of these assistants in the process of songwriting, so that it can, the friction points of creativity are minimized so that the juices can truly flow and get out. Luke said that the chapters of book are very detailed, and some people say instead of track 1, they say chapter 1. Yeah. So with the different, the analogy to storytelling is maybe not even an analogy. It might even be like exactly the same, because the song lyrics are in essence telling a story. Alapico, you said the music of the words, or the music of the words, then the rhythm, then the basic baseline melody, then tweak the words, then detail of the melody harmonies, then transitions, then tweak the harmonies, then recycle. Yeah, and recycle is definitely the right word to, continue on that cycle and to build it out. It's super interesting to see how different songs can develop depending on the starting point. In chapter 13, I get into many examples, and this is one approach, starting with the lyrics. The music of the words, and then the rhythm, then the melody, basic melody, then tweak the words, the details of the melody, harmonies, then transitions. Yeah, it's beautiful how it can come together. Okay, so that's good to know, Dave. You know about Procol Harum and that he was in the band, the lyricist for Whiter Shade of Pale, and they had an interesting thing going on too. The whole Baroque rock, the Summer of Love, especially with Whiter Shade of Pale, to have to bring in, and that's the cool thing about Elton John too, is that having that classical influence really like was so unusual, and is still fairly unusual, especially today. Like things are so poppy and so kind of basic in a lot of ways, and I'm painting with a very broad brushstroke in terms of the musical landscape, but it can be cool to hear influences that aren't typically mainstream, like Procol Harum, like Elton John, to have these like classical flavors. Billy Joel, kind of talking piano heavy here in terms of the influences, but really, really cool music. Glenn, you said, when I write a song, it just starts with some thought that goes through my head. Then a melody lends itself to those words. I start recording myself then, so I don't forget the idea. Yeah, and that's key too, is to get it down. People say, "Oh, how do you write songs if you don't know notation?" Again, music notation and theory are not one and the same. And if you can just like capture the idea, that's something that Sting would do with the Police, was just record it really quick. Even though he had Stuart Copeland as a drummer in the Police, I saw an interview with him where he was talking about for some reason he called his drum machine, this is in the early 80s, so it had a very basic sound, but he called his electronic drummer Dennis. And so he's like, okay, so I would come up with the chord progression, record it, and then I would get Dennis to play with me. He's just a robot drummer. But yeah, to be able to record it, capture it, and then flesh it out is key. Yeah, so Rob, the chord chart does help out for sure, and that's cool. It's cool how it works to be able to move around, and we looked at multiple keys here. We have key of C, key of G, key of D, and each of these examples, it's Ionian, it's major, but there's a whole range of modes / moods that you can do to explore harmonic space, and it is nice to have a musical palette that also supports the emotional thematic palette of lyrics. I mean, can you imagine if we only had the Ionian mode, or a major key, like happy sounding key? It would be very stifling and frustrating, because the human experience runs the gamut, right? It's very broad. So to be able to have multiple modes and multiple keys to express the variety of lyrics and themes that come out is like beautiful. if we had only one key, only one mode, it would be music wouldn't be what we know it to be these days. Oh, that's cool. About Procol Harum, Dave, you said the words were said at a party by a band member, the whiter shade of pale, which is like such a nice line. Alapico, you said that sketch first, then fill in the voids and pay attention to what it wants to do, a life of its own generated. So I love that. That's definitely the case. And sketching it is a cool way to describe it. Yeah, and letting the music lead you is key. Music is by definition vibrations. It's energy, and the fact that it follows these cyclical, symmetrical, geometric patterns. There's definitely something cool going on with music, and these almost gravitational relationships between notes and between chords, and how progressions drive the music forward, and a melody flows through musical space is definitely that's the key to songwriting. Is you kind of are in the passenger seat a bit, or you're a co-pilot with the process. And, if you try to, and we're speaking, I'm approaching songwriting from, the perspective of music theory, right? Which is a little bit geeky. It's a little bit heady, and could lend itself to being a little too left-brained in the whole creative process. But there is that whole that's a key point to make, like you do, Alpico, is that songwriting is like a manifestation of energy flowing through you. And so you can't overanalyze it. Like, allowing it to kind of lead the way is totally key. Sometimes people poo-poo the idea of music theory because they think it's going to stifle the creative process, which is exactly the opposite. It's like lighter fuel on the creative flame. Being able to understand patterns and progressions to be able to flesh out ideas is the key to remove the friction points, to allow the juices to flow, to allow the expression of music. And so, but keeping it in its place, having music theory serve its purpose, not to drive the process, but to support the process, for sure. All right, let's see. Peter, you said an absolute classic chorus, "It's Raining All Over the World" by ELO. ELO is awesome. I love those guys. And I need to listen to that song. I'm sure I can picture I'm sure I know. To picture a song is such a visual way of describing an auditory medium like music, but I need to listen to that again. I think I can hear it in my head right now. In fact, thank you. I'm probably going to be listening, hearing that in my head all evening now. I love Yellow. Let's see. Scott, you said, I usually end up having lyrics or a line that come with a melody, then I work it from there. So that's interesting. So are you saying that you have, like, do they kind of like come to mind together with the lyrics and the melody, almost like conjoined twins that are birthed that way? Or does one typically come first versus the other? Are they conjoined, or are they fraternal / identical twins? That's an interesting starting point. Yeah, gravitational for sure is how music works. It's these, and if you think of notes and intervals as, intervals really are what music is all about. It's the relationship between individual notes, or the relationship between chords, or the relationship between sections. It's that gap, or that void, as you describe, that having that space between things gives meaning to everything else. And so just like the planets in space have meaning because of the vacuum of space between them, the gravity that connects objects within space, and I know this is waxing philosophical here, but it describes music. That void or that gap between notes and chords, there is like a gravity. There's a relationship that draws certain notes together. That's the geometry of music. And so by tapping into that inherent nature of music, that gravity between elements really does that. That is how you can allow it to guide you in the process, because music has its own life, as it were, its own energy that drives you in the process. They come together. That's very interesting. So in terms of having the lyrics and the melody line arrive together, well, that's awesome too, because it's like that definitely lends itself to developing the idea, because you've got the limbic, visceral melody line and the like explicit storyline like coming hand in hand. That's beautiful, and that I'm sure that is like a fun way to start. I love that. Alpico said, so dancing in musical space and flowing with musical gravity, which limit suggests the next dance move. Yes. And in the course, I think it's like lesson 9, I think of it, I describe the process as almost like Tai Chi, where there's that fluid motion where you're moving through harmonic space, and the movement kind of like lends itself to the next move. It is like a dance, and that gravity guides you in the process. It actually gives me chills. Music is like truly the coolest art form, because it's so like amazing, for lack of a better word. I wanted to say something more amazing than the word amazing, but so Scott, you said it's not lyrics, it's usually a bass line or riff. Gotcha. So that's cool. So depending on the mood, and I find bass line, I love bass lines, and bass lines are often kind of a starting point for me. Chord progressions for me are very inspiring, because there are so many melody lines that can ride those waves, the harmonic waves of a chord progression, because chords have multiple notes that are moving, in tandem through time. You can have, melody lines that can ride different like lines of that chord progression. And so I love starting with the chord progression. Starting with a bass line is really good too. A bass line is almost kind of like the love child of a chord progression and a melody, in that, it's supporting the chord progression, but has melodic movement itself. So that's awesome. Starting with that. Rob, you said, as far as ideas, I just like traumatizing things to have that have happened in my life, or really crazy stories, right? And just unload into my notes app, talk to text, and try to rhyme a little as I'm telling a story. That's really cool. So capturing the moment, and then like kind of almost like musicizing it in a way, or telling it in a way that kind of, rhymes would lend themselves to lyrics to have the song build. That's really cool. That reminds me, I know I geek out about the Beatles, but I think it was 1970, John Lennon and Yoko Ono released a double album called Sometime in New York City, which, a total of like 12 people have maybe even heard this album before. But he was going for something similar to that, which was to capture what was going on in the world. Sometime in New York City, the album artwork was basically like the New York Times or like a newspaper with different stories. And the point being is that, artistically, a lot of albums are so methodical, and so they take so much time that they aren't reflective of the times as they're really happening now. So the album was meant to be, some of the songs in a kind of a Bob Dylan type style, where he would read an article, news headline, and just be like, all right, I'm going to write a song about that. This is happening in the world. And it was meant to be, more artistic and reflective of culture in the moment. But what's even cooler is some kind of own story in your life, dramatizing what has happened to you, which is really cool. Surfing the waves and do's and dudettes. It's all about surfing the waves. And music is full of waves. It is energy. Tommy, no problem about being late to the party. And I'm glad that you're here, and thank you for joining. So this is hopefully a fun one. Songwriting, there's so many different approaches. Like I say, lesson 13, which I'm working on right now, is close to being out by the end of August. It'll be in August. And talking about the art of songwriting and different examples, starting at different starting points. Here we're focusing on lyrics as a starting point, which even as we speak, I'm kind of like have a greater appreciation for that approach, because it hasn't been my go-to personally, but I'm definitely going to be experimenting with more. And this is songwriting starting with lyrics. And we'll look at some other approaches in some videos coming up. I'll be posting in the library some stuff that we've looked at here, some examples. And like I say, lesson 13 is in the works. It's getting close to being out. And in my time working on all of this, it's probably about 10% of my time is working on admin stuff, which is just the stuff that has to get done. But 90% of my time has been focusing on the course. In lesson 13, like I say, is the next one. So I've been a little quieter on social media, pouring all of the coals on the course to get the course complete, have that moving forward, so that all sorts of stuff that I have in the works, which is now kind of slowed down a little bit as I'm focusing on the course, can just rush forth. Speaking of energy and waves. So that's the latest right now. Thank you for joining. And I love, as always, to geek out with you about songwriting, music theory and songwriting. So that is all for this video, for this live stream. And we will be talking very soon. So I hope you have a good one, and we'll talk soon.